Now this may be a little bit of a different intro than usual because today we're going to be talking about a creepypasta. And not just any creepypasta, but the Russian sleep experiment, which is probably one of the most popular of all time. It's even got some books based off of it and all type of stuff. And you may have noticed that the title says, "Was blank scary," right? That's the format of the title. And this is going to be a series that I start doing on this channel. Granted, this episode might not be that good. This is basically the pilot, where instead of doing a scripted video, I'm going to do a video where, you know, after reading the story a few times, I got some bullet points written down of stuff that I need to basically bounce off of. And I'm going to go into the origins of a story, go into how it impacted me and, you know, what I remember from my first time reading it or my first experience, and then compare that to me reading it now. And also just overall go over aspects of the story that I found to be particularly either creepy or inversely particularly like stupid, or just like took away from the scare for me, or just dated in general. So a lot of the stuff in this series is going to be stuff from like the 2000s to the 2010s. There's going to be a lot of creepypasta, but it's not just going to be creepypasta or even stories for that matter. There are going to be actual YouTube videos. You know, there's a lot of classics. If you think about it, a lot of classic cursed YouTube videos and older internet horror things. So first of all, for any of these videos, if you have some suggestion, if I see some comment that has a bunch of likes, I may write it down and it may be a part of this series, because these videos are basically meant to be more casual filler videos, kind of more similar to my second channel where it's casual but a bit more high edited than my second channel. So basically between each scripted longer video, you'll get these shorter like 10 to 12 minute videos. Anyway, I've spent way too long talking about that. Let's get into the actual story. Real quick, the game in the background has a couple moments where there's like 1 to 3 seconds of like text flashing in the background. I don't know if that actually affects anybody, but if it does, maybe just like listen to this like a podcast. But yeah, that's it. So from what I found, the story was posted on August 10th, 2010, at least on the Creepypasta wiki. I have no idea if it was posted anywhere else before that, but one thing I will say is that nobody knows who the author is. So that kind of adds to the scare, okay? It's a little bit creepier. Now, basically, this story is about, you know, a group of people that are captured during World War II, and they're basically prisoners of war. And what happens is these Soviet scientists keep them in this chamber. And the chamber has this gas. It's unnamed gas. And this gas is very important because it's literally the crux of the whole story. The gas is basically meant to keep them up. And I believe they wanted to test what would happen if they kept them up for a month straight. And they lied to them and said, "Oh, you know, we'll keep you up for a month straight. And after you're up for a month straight, we'll let you go home." But this was a lie, like I just said. And after the first, you know, for the first 5 days, it was cool, it was chill, you know, they're hanging out, they're chilling. But after that, things got a little weird, you know. After that, they started talking about darker and darker subjects to each other, darker and darker times from their life, and the whole vibe just started getting really unpleasant. And on top of that, as time went on, they started getting really paranoid all of a sudden. And then they started getting even weirder, right? First, they're like super paranoid, they're like whispering. Basically, they monitored, because it was the 40s, they didn't have any cameras, so they monitored them through like microphones and these little windows. And they kept coming up to the windows and whispering in the windows, whispering in the microphones, and they kept trying to basically like rat out the other prisoners, thinking that, oh, if I rat out the other prisoner, they'll let me go, which is pretty sad. But anyway, I wouldn't say it's that scary. Now, by day 14, they were like starting to be like really, they'd been silent for a while. And what was weird was that when they checked the oxygen consumption in the room, they noticed it's like these people are consuming oxygen the same way that somebody who's vigorously exercising would. And this makes sense as we go on in the story, because they're obviously exercising, or well, I don't know if I'd say exercising. They're doing physical activity for a reason. So anyway, after a while longer, they decide, you know, actually it wasn't even a while longer. I think I said day 14 a little bit ago. It was day 14 or 15 or something. They used the intercom and they talked in there to them because they couldn't get any other response. And one person got on the microphone and they said, "We don't want to be freed anymore. Like, you can just get out of here. Leave us alone." So obviously they were confused, the scientists. They're like, what's going on here? Why are these people all of a sudden like not caring anymore? So what ended up happening was they decided, okay, we're going to open the doors and get in there and see what's going on. So they go and they open the doors and they find a very unpleasant sight. First of all, 3 people are screaming in there. The only reason the 4th person wasn't screaming is because they physically couldn't scream. They were mute because they had been running around screaming so much that they basically just destroyed their vocal cords. And, you know, they weren't screaming because of what they'd done to themselves. We'll get to that in a second. I'm gonna have to be very careful about how I say it. They were screaming because they wanted the gas. They wanted to still be in the gas, this stimulant gas that was keeping them awake, and they were freaking out because they were like, no, turn the gas back on, shut the door. So I'll get more into my view on that gas in a minute, but before we get to that, the state of them was not very good. Okay, to put it nicely, a lot of their insides were outsides. Okay, and they had done that themselves. Now, I'm not sure what type of surgical precision they used because it said that they used their own hands to do it. I'm not sure how that works. Seems a little bit unrealistic, but that's what they did. And they also did that for a reason, which we'll get to later. So after they got taken out of there finally, which took a lot of work, apparently a lot of people, actually multiple soldiers specifically, died trying to get these guys out of there. That's how powerful they are. Somehow, after being up for like 15 days, they take these people and they take them into surgery. Now, there's 4 of them at first. The first one ends up passing away because they use some type of anesthetic on him, and the second he falls asleep, he instantly passes on. So they're like, that's weird. So they get the second one, and this one is the mute one. And he's like, no. Like, he keeps shaking his head every time they want to give him a sedative. So one doctor is like, you know what? Forget it. Let's just do it with no sedative. Like, let's just operate on him as he is. And he is very enthusiastic about this idea, right? He's like nodding really heavily, which obviously is not normal, but then again, what has been normal in this story so far? So basically, after that, they operate on him. One nurse is creeped out because he keeps smiling at her every time she looks at him, which is even weirder. I don't know what that's got to do with anything. Maybe he's just really happy to be there. And they end up doing the same thing with the other 2. And another interesting thing is that the mute one, after the surgery was done, was like, hey, he kept trying to say something, but obviously the vocal cords weren't working. So they gave him a notebook, or a pad of paper or whatever, and he wrote down that he wanted them to keep cutting him. And this sounds super edgy, and it kind of is, but it also actually makes sense as we'll continue with the story. So basically, it all culminates when the higher-ups are mad at these researchers, and they're like, this is not working out, your tests are garbage, you guys suck, we should stop this. And they're like, well, you know what, you're actually right. But then their commander is like, no, let's not do that. In fact, let's just keep going. So they start restraining these people, and of course at first they're fighting back, but then someone lets it slip, hey, you know what, we're gonna put you back in there with the gas, and they are like, you know what, yeah, I want to do that. So what ends up happening is they start bringing them back. Well, one of them ends up laying their head on a pillow, and when they lay their head on the pillow, they fall asleep and they pass away. So the other one that can still speak, so now there's only one left that can speak, and there's the mute one also. He starts freaking out. He's like, you gotta get us in there, you gotta get us in there. So they're like trying to rush him to put him in there because they're like, their brain activity is strange, and they're like, this is weird. Like, they keep passing away when they fall asleep, so we can't let them fall asleep. So the commander or whatever is like, okay, I'm gonna go in there with them, and 3 researchers are gonna go. Now, one of the researchers was not a fan of this idea, and he decided he was not going to be in there with everybody else. So he took out the commander, let's put it like that, and then he took out the mute guy. And then with the last guy, he said that he didn't want to be in there with whatever you things are, right? Like, they're not even human. And he's like, what are you? What are you? And then we get this beautiful quote. I gotta read this to you. It says, have you forgotten so easily? The subject asked. We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at any moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread. The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out, so nearly free. So that was the end of the story. And first of all, let's think about we're going to judge this upon multiple kind of categories. But first, I'm going to go into my personal experience with the story and how I felt upon my initial kind of hearing of it. This is not a story that I remember impacting me very much. There are a few stories that we'll talk about as the series goes on that I really remember, like, this bothered me, this really scared me, this was keeping me up at night when I was a kid. This was not one of them. I definitely remember listening to it, and I definitely remember being very into it. Like, it was commanding my attention at the time when I was, a kid, but I don't remember coming away from it being like super disturbed or anything. Now that being said, do I think there are disturbing aspects of this story? 100%. One is in the first category, which is how realistic is this story? I think there are a lot of aspects of it that are obviously very unrealistic. One is the fact, right, that these people are somehow living at all when they were found with, again, their insides outside for the most part. Doesn't really work like that. I'm sure there are people that have survived crazy stuff like that, but for days on end to just be like that doesn't really make any sense. That's one. Two is the ability to do a lot of the things they do. If you actually look at passages of the story, they're like somehow resisting sedatives, like they're just not working. They're using like 10 times the amount of morphine. It just does nothing to their vital signs at all. They resist like paralyzing agents and all type of crazy stuff. Now, I will admit, there are some crazy compounds out there. And even when you see like some of these videos of people that are on high amounts of meth or something like that, which I might have to censor those words, it doesn't matter. Those people can take a lot more than a regular person can because they have so much adrenaline going. So I could see like the fighting back really hard and even how they took out the soldiers and all this stuff. But I don't know, man, the resisting of the other things, it feels weird, especially because at that point they already would have been probably off of whatever that gas had in it for multiple hours. So I feel like they would have come down a bit. But anyway, one thing about it that is realistic is the whole concept of people capturing other human beings in war, and because they are prisoners of war or because they're from a country they don't like, even though they have nothing to do with the war at all, they take these people and they run experiments on them and basically relegate them to not being human. And besides the fact that that is obviously greatly disturbing in real life, it also adds efficacy to the story or makes it scarier because that could actually happen. So that's a point on the board. As far as the writing goes, which is obviously the next thing I'm going to judge, I think that the writing is fine. I don't think it's anything crazy. I think like the ending, for example, it was cheesy, but in an endearing way, in an amusing way. Also, just the story in general, if you read it, like there's so many moments, I'm sure I'll put some on the screen, where it's just like so overly graphic, and it definitely feels pretty dated for the time, because back in that time, a lot of things that may have been considered like overly excessive or cliche weren't cliche or overly excessive yet, because it was new and fresh, you know what I mean? So kind of got to take off a little bit there. And by the way, I'm not using like an actual point system, at least not yet. I'm not going to be like, this is 5 out of 5 stars, dude. But again, this is just the pilot, so I don't know, things could rapidly be changing. Now, outside of those things, also the overall impact. A lot of people are very afraid of this story. I'm sure you could actually go around on like forums and YouTube videos. There would be all type of people saying this is like the scariest creepypasta, one of the scariest stories. And one of the things that made the biggest impact was obviously the image associated with it of that guy that's sitting there, which the story tried to paint as one of the last remaining subject of the experiment, right, as they're talking to the researcher, which I would ask myself, how did they take a picture of him? But anyway, not that they didn't have cameras that they could have taken pictures with of the time, but it's not like there was a photographer sitting in there with them, so I don't understand that part. But either way, it's just a Halloween decoration. It does look pretty creepy, but once you figure that part out, it kind of takes away from it too. But I will admit that is a very impactful image. So overall, you know, we've already been here for a while. What do I think? Well, it didn't impact me much as a kid, so I can't necessarily compare it in that way, but I can compare it overall in terms of how people would reacted to it over time, especially at that time, versus how I think it would be received now and how I'm receiving it now. And I think it was much scarier then than it is now. I think the writing holds it back a bit. Like I said, there's a lot of like overly graphic parts and just these parts that I feel like now people would not even take very seriously. And obviously the ending also may come off as a lot more cheesy. Do I think it's still a nice read, especially because it's short? Yeah, unless you're easily grossed out, then definitely not. But yeah, I think it's nice. I think it's nostalgic as well, like a lot of these, if not all of these stories will be. So overall, my review, do I think it's still scary? I'm giving you a which means it's in the middle. I think if you were young enough nowadays and you read this story, or if you were unfamiliar with creepypasta as an adult and you read this story, you may genuinely be creeped out. And I think anyone that is greatly disturbed by certain aspects, like the effects of sleep deprivation and how that could affect the human mind, or the obviously inhumane experiments that people have done on real people in the real world, you may be a lot more impacted by this story than someone who's just like, this is a stupid creepypasta, who cares? So I think it's one of those where you could go either way with it. There are going to be other stories that I will cover that I promise you I will have a more concrete answer on. I will either be saying no or yes. For me, this story is, I would say, leaning more towards no for me personally. Like, it doesn't really scare me. It's not going to keep me up at night, but I think in general it would be an and that's what I'm going off of. So that was the first episode. I think it was great, and I don't know what else to say. Let me know what stuff you want me to talk about, and I guess I'll see how I'm even going to put this together, but that's it. And I guess my next video will be a big one. You'll see. Don't worry, you'll see.